Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about counter-punching to win. Now, Josh, when I was in Poland, one of the things I liked to do in the evening times was I would go and box this Croatian MMA fighter. I don't know if you remember him.
I remember him.
And it was usually Thursday nights. And, as we go to box him, I remember we'd start sparring. And what I learned, other than he was really good, is he'd typically let me throw the first punch. So I remember I'd come in and I'd throw a punch and immediately he'd slip it and he'd hit me so damn hard that it rattled me and I'd kind of, okay, and so I'd wait and we'd both be standing there and I'd throw another punch and then all of a sudden I'd just take a punch right back. And it just went over and over and over again. What I found myself is I didn't want to punch anymore because every time I'd punch, I'd get hit so hard back either in, that I just completely didn't want to punch and I just focused on defense, and that allowed him to go on the offense. And he just pretty much, for the whole time just really beat the hell out of me. Well, after that, I really got interested in what he was doing. What I learned later on is he was basically really good at counterpunching. And so I went on a long kind of effort to learn about how to counterpunch and how does that apply to not only just boxing, but warfare in general. So what I'm going to talk about is this idea of counterpunching to win. Typically, here's kind of the problem. The U.S. Army, we like to fight offensively. We like to attack. And when we were in Poland, we like to attack, but what was our mission in Poland?
Defend.
Defend. And throughout the world, the American Army, though we want to fight offensively, we're typically in a defensive posture. Disagree? I mean, look at the folks over in South Korea. They're in a defensive posture. Like we were in Poland, we were in a defensive posture. And many places throughout that, though we might want to throw the first punch, but we have to wait. And we have to wait for the enemy to attack first, and then we attack. And so it kind of starts this question of how do you fight offensively from a defensive posture? And that kind of got me into what we call counterpunching. So counterpunching is this idea that it quickly turns a defense into an offense. It's how you fight offensively from a defensive posture. So the idea, and when you're boxing two people, you'll see like really good boxers, they're actually really hard to hit one another. Their defense is so good, and they're just small little areas to hit that there's really no place to hit. And when you look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, their defenses are so good right now, it's hard to find a place to hit back.
Yeah.
So the idea is, typically when you go into planning an operation, you look for vulnerabilities, right? When you MDMP, you look for vulnerabilities. And what the idea of counterpunching means is those vulnerabilities don't appear at the beginning because the enemy's masking them. They're covering them up. So you really don't see them. But where a vulnerability appears, and this is important, is when that enemy actually strikes. So when two boxers actually fight, when they throw it, right now it's hard to find a place. When they actually throw a strike, they actually open up a vulnerability. So counterpunching is about understanding that when the enemy strikes, your opponent strikes, that opens up the vulnerability, which before was covered and was protected. Okay? So that's kind of the basic idea of counterpunching. So how do you counterpunch to win? Well, there's three key principles to counterpunching. Okay, so the first one is called the gift system principle. What the gift system principle means is instead of looking for vulnerabilities at your opponent, actually he will gift them to you. Every time the enemy makes an action, it actually opens up a vulnerability. So again, like two boxers are really covered up. There's not a lot of places to hit, but when they throw a punch, just that action opens up holes in their defenses. So rather than trying to make holes and try to find places where the enemy and identify them, just having the mindset that every time the enemy attacks or strikes, yes, they're bringing a strike on you, but they're actually uncovering a vulnerability. One of my favorite battles to study, and an ultimate example of fighting outnumbered and win is the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914, when the Germans defended and later attacked. One German army destroyed two Russian armies. What's interesting about that battle, this is a good example of the gift system principle. When the Russians attacked right across the border hit first, the German army immediately punched back. They stepped in and punched right back at a place called Gambinin. They hit the Russian army so hard that the Russian army was trying to uncoil their logistics. They were having all these trouble, and they couldn't figure out, they hadn't really thought through their communication systems. So what they started doing was getting on the radio in the clear. And because they were having so much difficulty, the encryption was much like us, with all our jabbing ourselves. But what they did, the Russians started talking in the clear, and the Germans picked up on it. Now, they never knew that was going to happen before the battle. They never even counted on that gift.
Yeah.
The Russians gifted them. They gifted them talking in the clear, and throughout the whole battle, the Germans were listening to what the Russians were doing. I mean, think about you were in a fight and you could hear the entire commander giving out his war plans. And you want to study the Battle of Tannenberg later on, you'll see that the Germans, that gift that the Russians gave them at the start of that battle is what really turned the tide, because the Germans were always certain of what the Russians were going to do. So what does that mean? Again, at the beginning of the battle, when the Germans and the Russians were doing their MDMP version, they never knew that was a vulnerability that was going to emerge. It only happened once action started. So that was an example of the gift system. So what I'm saying is, have confidence that when you're on the defense, you might not know at the time or be able to foresee what the vulnerabilities will be. But when the enemy strikes, when they make movement, there's going to be holes in their defense. It's going to expose holes in their defense. It's just up to you to fill those holes with punches or strikes. So first principle in counterpunching is acknowledge the gift system, that the enemy's going to gift you vulnerabilities when they strike. Okay, so then what do? The next one is guard, move, and hit. So what I mean by guard, it's a little bit more than just me having my guard up. What it means is guard is more of an offensive kind of task. Like when you think of a guard, like in a security mission, it's jabbing, it's moving, it's jabbing, and trying to get the enemy to come back at you. So it's not passive, but you always want to be guarding, moving, jabbing, right? Because typically, if I throw a jab, what are you going to do? Cover, and then you'll typically
counterpunch.
Counterpunch, or bring another jab back, right? So typical counterpunch drills: jab, catch, jab. So jab, catch, jab. So you're always trying to jab to get the enemy to take an action. Because if you know, once they take an action, they will gift you something. So it's guarding. The next thing is once you're jab, you got to realize that they're going to strike back. So you're kind of baiting an action. They'll strike back, and you anticipate that they're going to strike back. And so therefore, you need to be able to move. So a lot of times boxers, you watch a lot of videos, they're slipping, they're rolling. A lot of good one, a typical move is you jab, you step back, they throw a punch, then it opens up and you come across. So, jab, step back, come across. Typical boxing. So it's guard, throw a punch to bait something, because once you bait them, then you move. And then after they have exposed the vulnerability, now you strike. Now, much like boxing, you have to realize, in counterpunching and boxing, it's all about sequence and timing. So, one, you got to realize that, there's an old adage in boxing that says, trying to box without getting hit is like trying to swim without getting wet. So it takes a lot of practice. But the timing's important, because if you time it right, and remember, knockouts aren't about power, it's about timing. Knockouts aren't about power, it's about timing. Because unexpected punches hurt more. And what you're trying to do with counterpunching is, by baiting or guarding or baiting a punch, and you slip it and you're able to connect or find a vulnerability, hit them unexpectedly, that's the knockout. And you can watch all the videos and see it. It's usually the unexpected punch, the punch you don't see, is the knockout. Okay, this takes a lot of practice, but that sequence you need to keep in your mind is guard, move, hit, guard, move, hit. It's also about your range. And so you'll see what happens in warfare is all about being in the range to deliver that strike. Because if you're out of range, then you're going to miss. So guard, move, hit. All right, so first principle is the gift system principle. The enemy will gift you vulnerabilities when they punch. The second principle, the guard, move, hit principle. It's a sequence and about timing. Okay, the last one is the liver punch principle. So my son boxes too, and one time we were talking about the liver punch. If you don't know, a liver punch, your liver sits right about here. And a liver punch is different than getting punched in the face. You know, I've never found getting punched in the face, it's not fun, but it doesn't hurt that much. But you take a liver punch, it hurts. It hurts really bad. So one time my son was boxing, we were talking about this, and he said something I thought was really good. He says, Dad, when you get punched in the liver, it just poisons you. It just sends poison through you, meaning it hits you, and for a moment, this poison just goes out and you just collapse. It's something about it. Now, it's interesting. Your liver sits and becomes exposed when? For most right-handed boxers, most right-handed boxers, their power punch will come with their right. So they'll either throw a big hook or they'll throw a cross. Now, up until that point, good boxers, they keep their elbows tight to protect their liver. So when does a liver become exposed?
When I go on the offense.
When you go on the offense. And when you try to throw that knockout blow, so if Josh throws his right and I slip, that's when it comes open and I hit him in the liver. So what I mean by the liver principle, it's when you're guarding, you move, and when you go to hit, you realize you're aiming for that critical vulnerability. What are you going to hit them that's going to poison them? It's going to hurt so bad that they don't want to punch anymore. And it's being able to identify what's that enemy's, I call it, hey, what is that liver punch? Because once the enemy, like let's say an example in warfare, typical, an important asset for the enemy is their integrated fires command nodes, right? To be able to fire all their indirect fires on. That's what we're always trying to hunting for. When do those become typically unmasked?
When they start shooting.
When they start shooting. So up until that point, they'll move them, they'll cover them, they'll camouflage them, they're not seen. But the moment they unleash them, that's when they're masked. If we're able to bait them to shoot, move so we're not, destroyed or severely injured by that, and then hit back, and then what do we want to hit? We want to hit that liver punch. You strike it right back, and all of a sudden that punch hurts so much that they don't want to shoot as much somewhere. They're kind of tentative, much like if you get hit in the liver. If I threw that punch and Josh slipped, come on, hit me. If I slip and you hit me, it's going to hurt so bad. The next time I throw that right, it's going to be a little gingery. I'm not going to hit so hard. As a method to defeat those first battle fears and to fight outnumbered and win is how to counterpunch. Now, it takes practice, it takes drills. And the other thing that's important is you can't practice counterpunching alone. You need a sparring partner, and it takes practice and getting used to the drills and get used to the sequence. And that's much like infantry training. Yeah, drills work. You can go hit the heavy bag. You can go do your individual quals. But what you really need to do is you need to have a sparring partner. That's why maneuvers and fighting force on force is so important. Because if you go there and you practice that, and you realize and you try to apply, look for the gift system, practice the guard, move, hit sequence, and look for the liver punch. That's going to fight outnumbered and win, and how you counterpunch to win.